Our Social Development Minister Lindiwe Zulu says government remains committed to protecting the rights of every person to live free from discrimination and persecution based on who they are and who they relate with. Zulu was part of a silent walk yesterday, which was held in remembrance of those who've been murdered based on their sexuality at the Botanical Gardens in Pretoria. Zulu says that being a member of the LGBTQIA+ community doesn't make anyone less human. She says GBVF against the LGBTQIA+ community, women as well as children, should be strongly condemned. So to discuss the effectiveness of these campaigns, we're going to be joined via Teams by Advocate Brenda Madumise, Director at Wise for Africa. Advocate Brenda, good afternoon, and thank you for your time with us here on the SABC.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me.
We're obviously shining a spotlight on 16 days of activism against violence of women and children. I wonder at this point, from your vantage point, in fact, how serious would you say we are as a country in fighting the scourge of GBVF, considering the fact that, there are so many incidences coming to the fore. Just yesterday, the parole board granted Oscar Pistorius parole as well. What are you observing on that front as we enter this period?
Oh, yeah. We're experiencing heightened levels of cyberbullying, right? That is happening online. That has grown exponentially. We're experiencing levels of sexual violence cases. I mean, if you look at the statistics, and really the statistics are not telling the true state of affairs in this country of how many times women, LGBTQIA communities are sexually violated. You also see, again, on the positive light, really, is that we're able to talk about this gendered violence in the manner that we are. We have shown a spotlight on it, and we're forcing almost every South African to take note and to take action and to be active participants, not passive bystanders, right? So there is the positive side of it is that we're beginning to see people interacting and acknowledging that there is a problem. And I think where we are stuck, most of us, is finding the appropriate solutions in how we stem it.
Well, speaking about acknowledging the issues that have come to the fore and perhaps also dealing with some of the systemic issues, what is the role that economic inequalities play between men and women, unequal access to land, resources, education, amongst many others, that perpetuate these systems of violence experienced by women and children and vulnerable groups as well?
We're dealing with 100, 200 years of that system that has subjugated women for those over 200 years. So it's a system that was designed to take control and power over women and control over their bodies. So the discrimination did not happen yesterday. It has been something that has been in the making for the last 200 years. So when women stood and fought for their existence, for them to be recognized as human beings, for them to recognize to vote, for instance, that's where it comes from. So for the longest of time, the systems that we have, and they have not gone away, by the way, because the systems of patriarchy are still intact. What we see in the world is that masculinity and male power and authority is the order of the day. So inequality in itself, discrimination itself, and that's why you have gender dynamics because power and control comes up all the time. And so on a daily basis, we're navigating that patriarchy in the workplace, in the homes, in the schools, in the universities, in the churches. That power is still intact. And once you have that power and you have been privileged enough for it to give you the opportunities and the privileges that you have had, why would you want to give it up? And that's the issue that we're dealing with. You're dealing with people who don't want to relinquish that power control because you accept them and accept them very well.
At this point, how would you quantify the human cost of violence against women and children? In the same breath, what are some of the general public policies missing when it comes to dealing with violence as well?
I think, we can have as many policies as we want and laws as many as we want. When you don't have human beings who are driven by levels of integrity, respect for another human being, and I think we need to emphasize this. The laws are going to stop the violence against women, against LGBTQIA communities, against non-binary individuals. Laws want to stop anyone wanting to kill you, right? If they have made the decision to kill you. What is it that society requires to ensure that it doesn't happen in the first place? And I think what we're doing at the moment, we're having as many events as we can and really not tackling the structural issues. And if we don't address the structural issues, what are the structural drivers of gender violence in this country? We know what are those structural drivers. We know that it's listed in the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. So once we understand the structural drivers, surely our interventions and responses should be attacking those structural drivers of gender-based violence and femicide.
Yes, because it leads me to my next point and closing question as well. Some questioning whether we're just rearranging the chairs on the decks of the Titanic. Given the familiar depressing statistics on the prevalence of violence against women and children and vulnerable groups as well. So I'm also coming to the fore to question whether the awareness raising campaigns really are useful and the impact, really what can they have? Next year, do we just come back and after 16 days, do we just revert back to the status quo, forget about the problem until next year? What frustrations come to the fore for you as we enter this period once again?
Yeah, my frustration is exactly that. It's that we really ticking the box, right? We want to be seen to have done something during 60 days of activism, right? When we went to a march in 2018 under the banner hashtag the total shutdown, one of the demands that we made was that gender violence has to be a 365. You can't all along pretend that is not happening, and when comes 16 days, you're all out in force to try and say to society, we're raising awareness on gender-based violence. So if we are not on a daily basis addressing what gender violence is and how it manifests itself and what our responses, we will then come to an event on the 25th of November every year to come and lament what is working, what is not working, how we can change the laws, what we can. No, let's go back and reflect on the structural drivers on gender violence. Let's do that, right? We can't have ministers and presidents standing up and saying, oh, pandemic, crisis, scourge, when your interventions run in contrast to what you are saying. If it's a pandemic, it's a crisis. Your response has not been matched by that statement, right? And that's what we need. We need a government, we need a society that fully appreciate and understand that this is a crisis for this country. So it cannot be a problem that is left to women. It can't be a problem left to LGBTQIA communities. It can't be a problem left to NGOs. It's a societal problem that requires all of us to put our hands on deck and say, what am I doing as an individual to ensure that I am not a passive bystander? I become an active bystander. Where I see and hear, I act.